Well, hey, and welcome to the Becoming Better podcast. My name's Nate, and I'm so glad you're here. On today's episode, Josh, David, and I sit down and we talk about the widows. We dive into what the Bible says we should be doing for them and how that looks practically in our ministry and in our everyday lives. If you haven't listened to Sunday's message, I want to encourage you to stop here and give that a listen, as that will help make this conversation make more sense to you. Well, before we dive in, if you are interested in any of the events happening around Quad City at either location, you can go to our website at quadcity.church/events and see everything happening at both campuses this summer and in the fall. Well, without further ado, we hope you enjoy this conversation. Well, hey, how you guys doing?
Happy Monday.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Good. Josh, you just did something that I know you're not a big fan of. And I want
No.
to see if you've changed your mind at all. You went on a camping trip
Right,
one night.
I did one night.
So
In
are
the
you
summer?
for it now? Are you against it still? Is it still?
To be fair, it's not that like I have camped before,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I actually don't mind it in certain situations, right?
Yep.
What I don't love is like when it's really hot or really just miserable, like all that kind of. But it was actually nice. Weather was pretty nice. It was a Father's Day kind of thing with a bunch of different dads with sons, and so it was super enjoyable, really fun. It's just a lot of work to camp and all the stuff you got to take out there. So the good news is the guys who kind of put it together, I didn't have to
Oh, good.
do all the work.
Yeah.
They do all the work.
Yeah.
So it is just kind of like, hey, show up
Yep.
Yeah, that's not camping though.
and do the thing. Yeah. I just, yeah, man. We've perfected inside. It's just, I mean, like
We have.
we've actually, it's really good. And so
Mhm.
only thing I wish we could have added to the trip is like fishing for like real fish.
Yeah.
Like that. I'm like, I love to fish. I love to like a little small farm pond fish kind of guy.
Yep.
Not a like lake or that just doesn't. I've never
Yeah.
had a boat,
Yeah.
so it doesn't really do anything for me. But if I can like walk around it, I'm in. That's the
Yeah.
kind of size I love right
Yep.
there. Good bass fishing. So that would be the thing. That's the thing I miss the most is being able to go bass fishing.
Mm.
So yeah,
We used to catch a lot of catfish.
yeah.
Then you
Occasionally,
can have a fry up. And
did you go like the Pay Lake?
I'm sorry?
the
The
pay-
pay lake?
Pay
Like when you got to
lakes?
pay
Where
money?
we pay like
to-
$8 to fish for a catfish. You know what I'm talking about?
Well, I mean, you got to think most of my fishing was either in New York or Florida. And it's like you can kick a rock and hit a lake with catfish in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we would.
Well, the
we
Pay
wouldn't
Lakes
pay
was
for
like
that.
guaranteed. You
Yeah.
get like for sure. If
They're
you caught the biggest
stocked.
one, yeah, you can get some extra money, win grand prize, all that kind of stuff. So I don't eat fish.
Yeah.
So like I don't have any desire to catch catfish because they're like you're usually not throwing them back.
No.
Like the only time I'm throwing a catfish back is like, that's not what I wanted. Heck on you. Why are you eating my bass bait? Why do I have a catfish on my bass bait? So like if we went catfish fishing,
Yeah.
it was because somebody else in the group was gonna take it home and clean it and cook
Mhm.
it and do all that. I just don't.
It's a lot of work
it-
for.
It is a ton of work.
Mhm.
You guys, yeah, they're bottom feeders.
Mm.
Ugh. We ate it a lot as a kid growing up, man. A lot of fish. A lot of catfish growing up.
So once you decided, hey, I get to make my own menu now, catfish is off of it.
It-
Is that
It fell off.
okay?
Beef made it.
Yep.
Pig,
Yeah.
chicken, all those. I'm just not a huge seafood guy.
Yeah.
I just can't do it. But yeah, no. So it was fun, man. It was a good time. The boys enjoyed it. So are you a camper?
No.
Yeah.
Definitely same way. We've got it pretty good inside. And my my
mean,
bed is
like,
pretty nice.
Like a cabin, like you did.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
I know you do a cabin every
Yep.
year. Like that in my mind is like, man, that sounds like I'm still outside in nature. I don't
Yep.
mind nature for
Yeah.
nature's sake. Like I didn't mind the things we were doing and all of
Yeah.
that, but the sleeping on the ground
Yep.
part.
That's it. Well, that's camping in a cabin is not. You might be roughing it a little bit, but you're not camping.
Oh
Like,
no.
if you sleep in a bed, you can't qualify that as camping
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
But it's a nice trip outdoors.
It is.
Right?
And it's
I love
yeah.
outdoors. Like I
Yeah.
said, man, I don't mind the outdoors.
Yep.
It's just that ground
Yeah.
that my body just So luckily, Corey, our kids guy, he brought his pop-up trailer.
Yeah.
So I actually didn't sleep on the ground.
Oh
I
my
slept
gosh.
On a trailer. It was great.
This is ridiculous.
It was not. I really didn't camp, man.
Yeah.
Like I didn't camp.
So my family has gone camping exactly one time. We were living in Florida. Lucy wasn't born yet, so it was just me and Lisa and the 3 girls. And
So
a
hot.
bunch of other families invited us to this camping trip, and so we went all day long. We had a blast. Like we hung out by the fire, roasted marshmallows. They went down to the lake and hung out. It was excellent. Right up until about time to be sleeping on the ground with the shout of the cicadas and the frogs and the every noise in the world, and it being 95 degrees and 80% humidity. We made it till about 2:30 a.m. and then we packed the tent up and went home.
Yeah.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
It was
That's
a really bad night.
yeah. No, that feels right. Yeah. The boys did great. There was a little moment they got afraid. So our youngest and Corey's youngest were in a tent together. And one of them woke up and said, "Dad," not to me, to Corey, "there's a werewolf outside." I was like, "A what?" And I'm like half asleep,
No, tell me more.
Yeah.
I'm like, "A werewolf?" And there was some pretty loud coyotes.
Yeah.
And they were hollering and screaming. And so then they ended up in the pop-up trailer with us. So they ended up in there sleeping,
Yep.
But I was like, and they camp.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, they do.
They're used to being
Yep.
outside. But yeah,
well,
man.
they just got off of the week of camp.
The
so I'm
week of
sure they were
camp.
just
Dude, these
beat.
kids were exhausted. They had that camp tired, bro. It was so funny. But yeah, no. But I do love a campfire, like eggs,
Yeah.
bacon, and
Yep.
a cast iron.
Or you get the big cast iron pot and you cook like a beef stew
Yeah.
over that. That's a
Yep.
good time.
And luckily we
Yeah.
were in Williams, so I was actually freezing. I about froze today.
Yeah.
It was
chilly
way
in there.
colder than I anticipated.
Yep.
I forget I just forget the elevation change stuff. I'm like, oh, that's right. It was not 95 degrees in
Mhm.
Williams. It was, and again, out there, people have side by sides, and I just don't have that kind of disposable income.
No.
But I'm thinking, if I had a side by side, this make this weekend fun,
Oh, it
Yes,
would.
right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, man, they're just ripping up and down through those trails. I'm like, man, that feels like something I could get into.
Yeah. And especially in Williams, because you ripping up everywhere you go.
Yeah.
And then you go into town and there's that Dairy Queen. And they all go there in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So it's just parking lots filled with side by sides
That's like
at the Dairy Queen. And that's where you go.
It's the most redneck story I've
Oh,
heard in this area of
it's
the
amazing.
country.
I'm like, oh, man. But I don't.
Yeah.
I guess you got to get the trailer and the
Yeah.
truck,
Yeah.
the pool. I just all the extras that come on with
Yep.
like being an outdoor camper feels like it's expensive.
You got to prepare.
You do. I
If
just
you do it
don't.
right.
I just don't have that kind of disposable.
Or you have a bad time. Those are,
or you have a bad time. Yeah.
Those are your
Yeah.
options.
And you don't have an indoor toilet, and then life gets
Nope.
real dicey. But it was
Yeah.
fun, man. There's a lot of dads with their kids hanging
Yeah.
out. So that aspect of it, hanging out with boys, letting boys be boys and get muddy and catch frogs
Yep.
and hike and be bored.
Yeah.
That was so great. So like I said, there's a few older men who all listen to the podcast. They put it together for us, and we're grateful that they just want to invest and help
Yeah.
create men
Yep.
out of these boys. And so for that, I'm gonna go every year.
Yeah.
Just to get to hang out with them
Yep.
and watch them pour into our kids,
Yeah.
our sons, is a win.
Yep.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Awesome. Well, let's jump in. This last week, Josh, you were on the stage teaching, and we were talking to the church about how we should treat our widows. So,
Mhm.
David, you're in PV. Talk us through your morning. How was it out there?
Yeah. Man, we had a great morning in PV. One of the cool things about it being summer is you don't have to do a complete tear down all the time. So like this week we set everything up and didn't have to tear down the auditorium. So that's nice. So next week's team will have a little bit quicker setup time, which is cool. But as far as the service proper goes, man, it's good to be in PV. I don't get to be out there, but maybe once every 6 or 7 weeks. Love getting to connect with friends out there that I've made in my time here that I only get to see every now and again. But the service was good, man. It was high on engagement. It's great to just be singing and worshiping with people. The message hit a lot of people really hard this weekend. Um, yeah, I don't know what else to say. It was a great weekend, man. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, what stuck out was just the interesting perspective of, you know, us taking care of the people ahead of us,
Mhm.
Mm,
and also realizing that we potentially will get to a point where we're in that same seat. And we would hope that the generation behind us is following the word. And like, I hope, like, if I'm gone, that, uh, and Sarah's still here, that,
right.
the church is going to take care of her. And it was just a good kind of reminder and kind of insight of like what uh, Paul is challenging Timothy to let, the church know, like, hey, and I'm sure even like, it was really cool to hear after uh, talking with you, Josh, on uh, as you were preaching this and even thinking about this, the people you were seeing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Paul was the same way. Like he was,
Right.
he's seeing these widows like in the church, like, hey, you got to take care of them.
Yeah.
And, you know, uh, was a good challenge and just a good insight of what we're called to do. So
Absolutely.
I thought it was a good moment. And, even for me and Sarah, we were thinking through of like, okay, how do we also come along? Because we know a lot of the same ladies, and I'm just admired by their faith and
Yeah.
just admired by how they still serve. But it was a challenge for us to think through, okay, how do we come alongside them and be a part of their lives and support them not only through the church and the giving, but through
Right.
our own lives. So
Right.
Yeah, the direct intervention, right? Like
yeah,
what do I do specifically
Mhm.
yeah,
to help this person, not just supporting the church to let them do the work,
yep,
right? Makes me think of the story you shared this morning, right? That same lady that you and I
Yeah.
have talked to now several weeks in a row, and all of what she's gone through and how grateful she is for Jesus and the church. And
Yeah.
um
Yep.
yeah,
For
man.
sure. Definitely.
so killed it on time this week.
Yeah, man.
Is
Appreciate
there
it.
anything else you would have wanted to add?
Well, it's funny. The only thing I took out that I talked about in sermon planning, I always write and rewrite and add and take things away. But one of the things that I had taken out was when we were talking through this idea of like a healthy, God honoring family, knowing how to speak to each other.
Yeah,
So there was a story in there that when I was probably 10 or 11,
I remember you telling us.
I,
Yeah.
my grandma came to visit us. And now, for reference, we lived in Phoenix. She lived back in Kentucky. So we didn't really grow up with grandparents. So I grew up with parents, right? Obviously, a mom and a dad in the house and a brother, but we weren't really around older generation. And so I just never interacted with, we didn't go to church. There
yeah,
was none of that. And so I remember my grandma was there and I said some very unkind and unwise words to my grandmother. And all I remember is that she called my mother and my mother called my father and my father came home on lunch to handle it. And it was still in the days when whoopings were there.
yeah,
So it was not like I got put in a corner. That was the least of my worries.
Mm.
And I remember from that moment, like, oh, you don't talk to somebody who's older ever that way.
mm,
It doesn't matter how mad you are,
yeah,
but I just hadn't experienced it, right? Again, but it framed forever my thought process around, oh, that's a little different.
yeah,
Right? You know what I mean? And even in that too, I talked about and I had to pull it like I grew up with a brother and an older cousin. So like my conversation with my brother, right? Like we would fight each
Your
other,
brothers.
would
Yeah,
punch
yeah.
each other. My cousin, who was like a sister, honestly, like there's a whole different game, dude.
yeah,
It's like psychological warfare.
yeah,
But you learn to interact differently. Like I never would interact with my cousin how I interacted with my brother.
yep,
So in families you learn this. And so Paul's whole thing is of course we would operate that way in the church
yeah,
because we're a family.
yeah,
Like that's the whole piece of this. And so when you're in a healthy family, it makes a ton of sense. Like you would never disrespect your mom or dad
yeah,
ever. Like it don't even fly.
Mhm.
You wouldn't even think about doing it, right? And so
Mm.
yeah,
some of the struggle is families are they're all over the map
yeah,
in how they do things,
Certainly. Yeah.
and so having that consistency, Paul was pointing back to. But yeah, that was the only thing if I had more time, would have maybe shared the story about how
yeah,
young Josh was. Whew, again, you get the threat. Your dad's gonna handle it when he gets home, like
yep,
from work,
yep,
like at 5. It was
and you just sit in it.
he just when he came home at lunch. It was
There's a big difference when wait till your father gets home versus no, he left. He's on his way
Yeah.
right now.
he's on his way. It was like ooh boy, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's what I take back. I was like, man, I can never speak to my grandma in that way. That's crazy. And never disrespect her that way.
Yeah.
And so, and my dad did the thing that the dad has to do to a 11-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Had to put him in order.
Yeah.
So, but I am certainly grateful for it. I only took once.
Yep.
I am grateful that I did not need 2 times to learn that lesson.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's still when I sit
Mhm.
down sometimes and it's cold.
Yeah.
I still feel it a little bit.
Yep.
But yeah, that was the only thing, man.
Yeah.
So for
Mm.
sure.
So good. And that's interesting just hearing that, because not being in the sermon planning, but hearing that story just kind of reminds me, like Sarah and I have people in our lives that we have seen their family dynamic and we're like, oh, we want that.
Mm.
Yeah.
We both had loving parents, but the family dynamic wasn't healthy.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah. Same,
Divorce-
bro.
Yeah, divorce,
Same.
divorced families. So it was like, oh, so we see, just these families that were like, oh, you guys are healthy.
Yeah.
And it's not even like them showing off. It's just weird. We just noticed that
Yep.
there's something different about you guys.
Yep.
Mm.
Same, man.
So,
Yeah. And the church is where you learn that.
Yeah.
Again, and that's the hardest part is when you're trying to talk through that first 2 verses felt so out of context from the one, but it's just all the same stuff. It's
Yeah.
practical minute. When you're trying to talk about the foundation of family is in our culture right now, it's just all over. It's just
Yeah.
all over the place.
There's
So-
there's no clear definition,
right.
right? There's
What culture said there's no
Yes.
clear
Yeah.
definition.
right, exactly. Yeah.
And so you have to just, and that's why I love that we just here keep teaching that this is what we do. This is what
Mhm.
we do. This is what we
Yeah.
do. This is what we do. This actually matters.
Yeah.
It isn't something that just is throwaway, but actually it's super important for our context and how we relate to each other.
Yeah.
And again, it makes sense when you've been in a healthy family.
Yeah.
And I think that's a struggle too. One of the things we talked about in our sermon planning group is if you're in that and you grew up in a non-healthy family, really early you may just check out and go,
Yeah.
my thought of family is terrible.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be like that. So
Yeah. Well, it's the same anytime that we try to teach about God as Father, right? It's the same tension
Right.
of, yeah, but my dad wasn't great. It's
Yeah.
like he was absent or he was addicted or he
Right.
was abusive or I never met him, right? Like all of the
Right.
various reasons that you could have to push back against that.
Yeah.
It's the same
Yeah.
issue. Well, yeah, my family was a mess. Why would I want the church to look like a family?
Mm.
right,
you know?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, so even one of the lines, we don't quit on each other is the
Mhm.
thing in our society now. We just kind of walk out on
Yep.
each other. Like,
It's just,
and that happens in the church all the time. So it's like, nope, we're going to lean in and have these conversations. And again, that's the heart of all of this is Timothy has been charged to fix the problems of this church.
yeah.
But actually, to do it in a way that continues to help people
Yep.
and grow the church. And so just a real practical thing that it gets real messy and real difficult, but it's definitely worth it.
Yeah.
So-
and I feel like even the Excel video update that we did just
Yeah.
aligned so well with Dean and
Lori,
Laura.
yeah.
Laura's
Lori.
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 The Hunts.
The Hunts.
Yeah.
Their story of, they love Prescott Valley.
Yeah.
They love the church, but
Mhm.
they need to go take care of
Right.
his mom.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yep.
And what's so funny is the first half of that story, right? Our kickoff for Excel was their first weekend. We've known that for a long time because Dean's been serving with Dan's team in Prescott Valley for a while. And so
Yeah.
we knew
Yeah.
that part. So we knew, hey, if there's an opportunity for us to share that part
Right.
as an Excel story, we should. And then literally we're getting ready to have that conversation with that family. And they go, yeah, actually, we're going to have to leave because we got to go take care of his mom. Like this is what God's
Yeah.
calling us to do. And just for some reason, the Holy Spirit aligned those two opportunities for us to
Yeah.
share that in that moment and bridge that gap between the conversation of what it means to be sacrificial
Right.
and financially to what it means to be sacrificial, right? In the way that you take care of other people.
Right. Yep.
I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was a cool dovetail. Yeah. It just worked
Yeah.
out. Again, to your point,
Mhm.
Holy Spirit just going, I got you.
Yeah.
We're going to make this work.
Boom.
we're
Yeah.
gonna take care of
We
it.
got this. So
Yep.
for sure.
So awesome. Well, let's jump in to our questions this week. So thank you for submitting these in. And we'll start off with uh, Beth's question first. So she says, when God spoke of widows, do you think he also meant widowers as well? My cousin is taking care of my uncle, who is in his 90s and disabled, who recently lost his wife, and I so admire her sacrifice, devotion, respect, etc., and have expressed as much to her. I think these verses would be an encouragement to her. I'm assuming God also meant for us in the church to take care of widowers as well. Would you agree?
So I would disagree in the idea of when God speaks of widows, he does not mean widowers.
Yeah.
God does not mean that. And because in their context, either in the Old Testament and the New Testament, widows had nothing.
Nothing. Yeah.
They didn't work. There was no jobs.
They had no way to make income.
There
They
was
couldn't
no
own
income.
their property,
Again,
all of
they were
that stuff.
like that's why the certificate of divorce was such a big deal.
Mhm.
Like that's why it mattered, right? That's why it was even given in the first place. Because God, that's why God doesn't desire for divorce, because he knows the vulnerability of a woman and then children.
Yeah.
Like he sees
Mhm.
the impact of what happens there, of why it is such a big deal. And so men, though, had rights to do anything they wanted.
Mhm.
And men got inheritance and all of those
Mhm.
things. Like the daughter, if she never marries, she just stays in the family with
Yeah.
dad. Like dad still, that's why it's the who gives this woman to this man? Her mother and I do. She now is in a wedding, no longer dad's responsibility. It's it's the husband's responsibility. That's what happens because he now is called to provide and care for her. So, Beth, where I would say is what God does not mean widowers and widows are interchangeable.
Mm.
He is very clear that this is just widows. But what I would say is
Mhm.
verse 8 does what your cousin is doing, right?
Yes.
Verse 8 of our text, anyone who does not provide for their relatives. So Paul, again, when we talked about this, I tried to say, Galatians 6:10 says, hey, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone. As believers, we should care for everybody as we have opportunity. And then he says even further, especially those of the family of believers. So of course, I should take care of the church. It's Galatians 6:10. Well, then in this verse, Paul says, he's been talking about widows, but he says anyone who does not provide for their relatives, especially for their household. So your cousin providing for your uncle is exactly what the scripture is saying.
Yep.
So whereas no, it is not the same as a widow and a widower, it is what we're called to do.
Mhm.
So she has the means and the opportunity and is called to provide. And yes, you should tell her how much she is following Jesus, how
Yeah.
much you admire her for that, and should even offer, hey, how can I help? Like, what
Yeah.
does that look like? Hey, if
Yeah.
you need a break,
Yep.
you need a weekend respite
Mhm.
that I
Yeah.
can care. Again, maybe they're not in the same, but maybe you can offer that for her. She goes,
Yep.
man, I just can't afford to pay for a healthcare person for the weekend. Hey, maybe we can do that for you.
Yeah.
Right. And so that is the beautiful picture. So where scripture would not say that they're the same thing interchangeably, widow and widower, what it would say is, yes, if someone in our family, in our household is in need of care and we have the ability and the means and what that looks like, if it's bringing them into our home or providing them, like we have to do that.
Yeah.
And so I love that is a very real picture of people who are doing, there's tons of people who are doing that in our church. I know of a couple daughters who are taking care of dads whose wife has passed away, who dad is now all alone and has been alone, and the daughter is caring for but again, in that society, it usually wouldn't have happened that way.
Mhm.
Just wasn't of what it would have looked like. Our culture is a little different in that, in the
Yeah.
way in which wives have been able to work and there's retirement. So
Yeah.
it's just really different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But still, in these instances, disabled and in his 90s, like somebody has to care.
Mhm.
And so it's cool to hear stories like this. And so, yeah, Beth, you should applaud your cousin for this. So, you got anything to add?
Yeah, man. What's interesting about this text is it's exhaustive, but it's exhaustive in an opposite order. It's almost like, how sometimes it builds like you should, take care of your friend
Right.
or take care of your family and then take care of your friends and
Yeah.
take care of the community. But Paul goes, do good to everybody,
Right.
especially do good to the church.
Yeah.
make sure you're doing good to your relatives. Like he dials down
Right.
into these
And
in this way that it's like it's still we're leaving no room for excuse.
right. Exactly.
Right. It is the call is to do good to everyone, to live sacrificially in such a way, right? Again, think of yourselves more highly. Or no, I'm sorry, think of others as more highly
Right.
than yourself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like just these constant reminders of like to live a life of sacrificial servanthood
Absolutely.
and then to be more specific, right? In this passage, he's harping on those who are widows.
Right.
But this man and your cousin fall right into exactly what he's talking about. Take care of the people who are in your family, especially those in your household,
Right.
right? And that is living sacrificially, and that is great,
Yeah.
encouraging thing.
And really,
Yeah.
and again, really, really hard. It's so interesting too when we look at the Old Testament text around this idea. It's always widows, fatherless, foreigner,
Mm.
Yep.
people who have no rights in society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they are always lumped together in the two texts that we shared. That you saw that over and over and over again, or the three texts in the Old Testament that we shared. Those are always linked together.
Yep.
That's why the church has always done that. That's why they've cared for the orphan. That's why they've taken care of the widow, and that's why they've loved the stranger. Because God knew that this group of people, these three unique people, would always be the most vulnerable,
Mm.
and they don't have any rights. That's why you look at the care of humanity. That's why the church is different, or why it's called to be different.
Yes.
Because God set that out from the very beginning. It's always been the story, because this is who God is.
It was a
Yeah.
cultural distinctive of God's people
Yes.
from the minute he gave them cultural distinctives.
because
right?
it was God's
Yeah.
distinctive.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so that's what we have to remember is we are, and again, but to David's point, it's sacrificial, and by nature, and I try to touch on this a little bit, is that's not how we live.
No.
That's why Paul says these should first learn. They got to learn to do this, because it's not by nature. I'm not going to go, you know what I'm going to do? I'm giving my time and money and comfort
Mhm.
to care for someone else. Again, and a lot of times when you
Mm.
are finally past caring for a baby, or you're looking at it going, how the time kind of works now for us in our country. It's like, I've got my kids out of the house, and now me and my wife can spend our time
Yep.
together. Oh, my mom now needs me to care for her, and you know what I mean. You think you're
Yeah.
out of it,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, you're back in it, and your selfish pride goes, I don't want to do that.
That's an interesting dynamic because what you're describing there is the selfish pursuit of pleasure,
Yeah,
right? In an inverse, right? Because I mean, I think that way too. I've thought like, what's it going to be like when just my wife and I and our kids have moved on and they're forming their own lives,
Right.
and we spend time together again like we did when we were newlyweds, right? When it's just her and I, and we
Right.
can have that schedule and then look forward to grandbabies. But I don't know that there's any evidence that says that we're ever called to live like teenagers again,
right.
like or early 20s or 20s,
Right.
whatever,
Yeah.
like, and maybe that's, maybe you're really putting your finger on a very selfish perspective that I think we could even start to begin to change as young married people of going,
Right.
once we establish a family, we're probably never quote unquote alone again.
Yeah.
Like, and that's part of the dynamic that is different in the church is we just plan from minute one. It's going to be you and me and whatever family we need to be taken care of at the time.
Yeah.
And
Right. Yeah. And again, if that's the immediate family that's in my house that shares Josh Garrett DNA,
Yep.
or if it's family within the church
Yeah.
who needs people, who needs care. Now we have space. That's why Jason always talks about, when we talk about orphans, like he always gets real practical around. There's a lot of people in Prescott who have extra rooms in their home,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like tons of them. It's no longer just and what is now for us would be challenging,
Yeah.
because I don't have another room.
Yeah.
And
Same.
time, that all disappears when you're retired, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't have time or the means or but again, it's like God goes, that's not the case anymore. So I always love when we talk about orphans, we don't ever give the wiggle of like, oh yeah, just support the organization
Yeah.
that does it, right? No,
Mhm.
this is probably on you. Same here, to your point. Hey, all right, Sarah, how do we do this?
Yeah.
What does it look like for the women that we
Yep.
know? And there's a ton of people who do things. It is really, really cool.
Mhm.
Kind of the story of some of the men who support and come to us and go, hey, Josh, I just want to help. Like if you know a widow,
Yep.
let me know who they are.
Mm.
Yeah.
I want to help them.
Yeah.
And there is organizations. We have the House for Hope that we support as a
People Who
church.
Care is also for
People Who Care
Yep.
essentially is for widows. Like
Yeah.
70% of their
Yeah.
their clientele would fall into widower.
Yeah.
And House of Hope is literally elderly, homeless, who essentially don't have anybody.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And they now have a family. They have this collection of people that they live with and are supported by. And so it's always really, really cool to see that. So yeah.
Yeah. So good.
Man. Yeah, just real quick before we move on to that next question, just the idea that we have an opportunity to model this for our kids and future grandkids and all of that. I think even not from the selfish perspective of I want somebody to be there to take care of me,
Yeah.
but more that when I'm long gone, I want them to have this muscle of I just care for people who need help. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's cool.
And it's interesting, growing up in the culture I grew up, that was kind of the normal thing.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
Yeah.
And I feel like just as I've grown up, it's kind of something that, as we're talking about this, it was like, oh, yeah, I remember my grandma had one of my aunts in the house and she had her kids and they're getting to the point where her kids were having kids and they were all in the same house.
Mhm.
And, grandma would take care of the grandkids and they would take care of. So it's interesting how some cultures
For sure.
do that very well.
You have definitely a familial aspect of how we do, right? And again,
Mhm.
our individualistic, especially in the last 40, 50 years, have
Yeah.
shifted,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
We are moving away. And
Yeah.
now we're so far away.
Yeah.
That's just not even heard of.
Yeah.
Like, again, most people in my hometown never left.
Yeah.
And again, I look at it and go, that's really weird. But honestly, for the first 200 years, I would be considered the weird one.
Yeah.
That
Mhm.
my family moved all the way out west is
Yeah.
weird.
Same.
Yeah.
With that's just the cultural distinctive of the South.
Yep.
You live on the same street
Yeah.
as your family. You just add another house to the compound
Yep.
sometimes.
Yep. That street might be named after a great uncle,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? Your family has lived there forever. Or to your point,
Yep.
grandma's old. She comes and lives with us.
Yep.
Like black community is very much like that.
Yeah.
Even Southern white communities like that. And, Hispanic for sure. They
Yeah.
always got a grandma up in the house.
Yeah.
And you don't say certain things, or you
Yep.
speak in Spanish. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like
Exactly.
you have these things that you learn.
Yep.
And so
Hmm.
we just are now in a culture where it just doesn't happen.
No.
So we see this now as weird.
Yeah.
To your point, you're going, well, that's what my family's always done.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, they were doing the.
Yeah.
They may not even know that it was
Yeah.
the Bible they
Yeah,
were doing
exactly.
it for. But
Yeah.
it's like, oh, that's what we did.
Yep.
You just cousin, come on in.
Yep.
Come help them. And my family not a believers growing up, but somebody always lived with us.
Yeah.
My dad and especially my dad. Now his dad and mom were faithful believers, loved Jesus, but they had an extra room in their house for that reason. That if anyone ever needed a place to go, a place to stay, they
Yep.
could stay at their
Yeah.
house. And so I did get to see that model. To your point,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
so I first home had an extra house. Literally, like second day, somebody calls and goes, "Hey, I need a place to crash," and I'm like, "Yeah, man, you come stay at my house." It was just normal.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I didn't even know, like, oh, that's what you do.
Yeah.
This is the biblical piece of it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
having those abilities to do that is helpful. So now the scripture backs it up is, I have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not that this is an exceptional thing that only some people do. It's something that we're actually called to do. My grandfather taught me the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we used to joke, he collected strays, right? Like
Mm.
when I was in high school, I had friends that would live with us for a period of time because
Yep.
they just needed a place to crash for
Yep.
2, 3, 6 months. And it was just part of it. It's part of the deal.
Yeah. So good.
Mhm.
All righty. Next question's from Adam. Thank you for sending this
Mm.
in. He says, Josh, thank you. Thanks for the lesson today. It really struck a nerve personally. Specifically, your statement, if your mom becomes a widow, according to scripture, it is your responsibility to take care of her. No if, ands, or buts. Thank you for not pulling any punches. Question, supporting widows can take many forms emotionally, financially, etc. I'm assuming Quad City has a financial support system in place for our widows in need as far as financially supporting widows. Does Quad City have a line item in the budget for this type of support? If not, I challenge the leadership to include it ASAP.
Good challenge.
So let's answer that one, and then
Yeah,
you had
'cause he has
the
a second part,
two.
Yeah, so absolutely, Adam. So, man, thanks. But yeah, we for sure do.
Mhm.
So we have 2 line items at each campus, and so kind of how our staff operates. Honestly, if a widow is in need, we usually help. I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of the again, obviously being wise and responsible, but so great example is a couple weeks ago, somebody reached out to me, said, "Hey, Josh, I have a 90-year-old widow who's in need of some help, and so can the church help?" I went, "Absolutely, the church can help."
Yeah.
I go, "Hey, have her send in our stuff. I'll make sure I tell, Brad and Anthony and Corey, our pastoral team, and Kenny, like they oversee all of that now. I've kind of stepped out of that role. Just moving into the new role. But I said, hey, it's coming, and she needed some specific work done. And I don't normally do this, but for this situation, I said, hey, tell her to call these people and tell her to tell them Josh from Quad City sent you,
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
this is what we do. And it was another believer within our church, and I knew that we serve and follow the same God. And
Yeah.
we believe in the same thing because we go to church together. And I don't normally do that. If people have work that needs to be done by professionals, I give them 3 or 4 options.
Yeah.
I go, yeah, call these 4 people. Whoever gives you the best deal, fantastic. But for a widow, it's like, hey, actually, I'm going to use any card I can and go,
Mhm.
call, do this. And it's instant. And so to
Yeah.
answer your question, Adam, absolutely. We kind of all default to this, like, oh yeah, we're widows in our church who need our help. We help. And we
Yeah,
have
We don't
some-
even really question it very
yeah,
much.
we have
It's
some
not like-
pretty high. We have a pretty generous line that's able to help and able to probably go and get more if need be.
and then
Yeah.
and then to your point, godly people who support the church who also share that same outlook.
Absolutely,
And we can go, hey, what can you do to help this person out? And
Yeah.
we'll often go way above and beyond
absolutely.
what our line item could afford
Oh,
to help.
100%. Yeah, and there are you know, and we've done that with people in the community too. Like
Mhm.
this lady that I'm telling, she didn't even really go to our church.
Mhm.
And then there are others that have called, and it's somebody who's a widow with no family, and
Yeah.
we go, I feel like these are again, when I read the Old Testament, these are the people it feels like God says to care for, so I should do this.
Yeah.
Yep.
And again, because in my mind, our team is my kind of thought process is, I'm not sure anyone in our church would be upset if I went, yeah, hey, I helped a widow today fix her air conditioner,
Yeah.
and it cost us $1,000.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I don't think anybody would be mad at that.
No.
So, because I think we're all on the same page. I think we all believe that this is what we're supposed to
Yep.
be doing, and so we actually just being made aware of it sometimes is the hardest for us. Is
Oh yeah, because you don't necessarily know. But that's
You don't.
that's the joy of when we're as an organization, right? When we're in a good place financially and we're good stewards of the resources
Yeah.
that we have been entrusted with, we have freedom to jump in and do that stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can add money to go. We want to not only support our widows, but how do we support widows in our community?
Yep.
And then how do we? Oh, they're trying to actually help widows find permanent housing. Oh, we like to be a part of that. Great.
Mhm.
How can we help do that? And again, it's whereas we individually have a responsibility because we're all the church. It's our shared responsibility.
Yeah.
The coolest thing about being part of a church is my giving goes a lot farther with 1,500 other people's giving.
Oh, 100%.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like individually,
Yep.
there is a limit in which Josh could do, but
Mm.
collectively, we get to do some really cool things.
Yeah.
Because collectively, we get to pool our resources. That's why it said in the first church that they sold their property and then laid it at the apostles' feet, and the apostles then gave it to who was in need.
Yep.
Like they could have just easily walked to Nate and gave it to him, but they believed in this. Like, I'm going to pull our resources together because I think the good that can be done is
Yeah.
just a lot higher.
Yep.
Right. And so that's the coolest thing about being a part of a church is my $100, just as an example, goes a lot farther when there's 10 other $100.
Yeah.
Right. 10
Mhm.
other people chipping in 100.
Yep.
Like it's a really cool thing to watch that happen.
Yeah. And there's also leadership who is trying to be wise and discerning
Right.
and like looking at how to make the greatest impact.
Right.
All of that comes into play.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
good.
absolutely.
Sweet. And then Adam gives a challenge to the congregation. He says, if you know of a widow that is truly in need, with no family support, please let the pastoral staff know.
Mhm.
Sometimes
Hmm.
pride gets in the way, and a widow in need may not come forward. Which I'd agree. We see that a
Mhm.
lot.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
thank you, Adam, for submitting that.
Yeah. Just a
So
good reminder.
yeah,
Mhm.
And again, you got to then rub shoulders and bump up against people, and
Gotta know
you
people.
got to know
Yep.
people.
Yeah.
Which is what we've been saying. You can't just show up. You got to get in there and So let me tell you a really cool story. So this lady comes up to me at Pastor's Point, and she is 30s to 40s. I don't know. I'm really bad at ages. And she goes, Josh, let me tell you about this group of widows who've adopted me into their group. She goes, "It's amazing." She goes, "They saw me sitting by myself in church, and they just invited me over. We do Bible studies now together.
Oh.
We meet one-on-one. Like, I'm a part of their group." And I know the widow she's talking about.
Yeah.
They were one of the ones in my mind as I was writing this message. And because I noticed probably, I don't know, 3 months ago, I was like, "That's an interesting group sitting together."
Yep.
I was like, "Huh, I wonder how that happened." Like, you're
Yeah.
curious. I'm
Yeah.
like, "How did that group get together?"
Mhm.
But it was they are quiet, faithful servants of the church,
Mm.
and they noticed a new lady to our church who's all alone. She's not a widow, I
Yeah.
don't think, um, who's younger, but goes, "Oh, we should invite her over because we know what it's like to sit alone."
Yeah.
And she comes up and tells me, she goes, "Josh, the faithful lives you're talking about, I know them."
Yeah.
And I go, "No, I know you do, because I was talking about them."
Mhm.
They were one of the ones I made on, because when I had them in my mind, she's like, "Good, I just had to make sure you knew that there were these." I was like, "I know." And so again, though, but it was just because I have the perspective of being able to sit and see and
Yeah.
having all these different services. So again, I'm super grateful for that perspective. But it was really cool for her. She was so excited to get to share with me of like, I know those ladies Paul's talking about,
Whew.
and they
Yep.
make my life so much better. And I went,
That's awesome.
they're still just serving.
Yeah.
That's what it means to be hospitable.
Yep.
That means that they're opening their home up to this lady who's new to our church, and she's now connected. And it doesn't make, that's the part that it makes zero sense.
Yep.
Doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
They're like, when you just look at it, surface level, you go, that group of people probably would never hang out.
Yeah.
But the kingdom of God does these really amazing things
Yeah.
with that. It was such a cool story to hear of our church doing the thing that we want them to do.
Yeah.
Because that just ties right back into the analogy that's not an analogy, right? That the church is a family.
Yeah.
Because when you look at families, it's the same thing. It's like, whew, those two people probably wouldn't hang out if they didn't have blood to share. Like, I mean, come on,
Yeah.
and that's what, if we are as the church meant to model family,
Yep.
right? If the whole church is this panorama is the wrong word, vignette rather, of Christ in the church is family on earth. Like they're meant to mirror one another.
Mm.
Like that's just another example of it.
Mm.
Some ladies who have very little in common with this person, except they know what it's like to sit alone. Say, I'm going to love on you and spend
Yeah.
time with you and support you.
And it's blossomed into what you could tell is a genuine friendship.
Yeah.
And sisterhood.
Yeah.
It was such a cool, it was a cool story. Yesterday at Pastor's Point was more emotional, just because I got to connect with some of those ladies that I had in my mind when I was thinking about this. And but that one was a really cool story, her sharing about
Yeah.
these ladies who she gets to see and did exactly what we should do. No, Josh, they look like Jesus. I go, I know they do.
Yeah.
I watch them every week.
Yep.
And I see them every week. And it is a testament to, they don't want any fanfare.
No.
They don't want to be, that's the thing,
Yep.
right? They don't want any of that. They
Nope.
just come and serve and do the thing. And you're like, ah.
Mhm.
And we're better because of it.
Yeah.
Like I'm better because of it. So for sure.
Alrighty. Last question I have for us is from Brian. He says, in Paul's definition of true widows, we have been, or widows who have been left all alone. Would it be right for us as a church to include widows who have been abandoned by their children or grandchildren who are not believers?
I feel like there's a question behind that question. The question behind that question is just anybody who's alone, right? Like anybody who's been, whether they've been left alone by family or by circumstance, right? I think it would be absolutely right for us as a church to be supporting people who have been left alone.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And again, we can't forget So a couple things with the for Paul, like he nails in specifically for us for a reason, like the qualifications.
Yeah.
And we didn't get to really talk about it, but like not over 60 is because in Paul's mind, there's a time frame on what the support looks like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
that it wasn't going to be for 45 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Actually, you'll see this week in the text, Paul actually, the only place in scripture that talks about for widow to remarry is in this text we're going to look at this week,
Yep.
that you should be remarried. And he's a couple reasons why. One of them is they get to be busybodies, is what Paul says, because they're not living with this like, oh, they live with, I got all the time in the world.
Yeah.
I'm
Mm.
good. When they're 60, which is maybe our 80, they're trying to make it round is hard, like the equivalent.
Yeah.
But
He
60
just means in the last
last,
season of life,
We
whatever
got-
that is. Yeah.
and so they lived with the urgency.
Yeah.
And so that's what Paul meant. Those who were close to being in glory with Jesus,
Yeah.
they're on the list because it wasn't going to be a lifetime of support. You know what I mean? And then it was, and then it was the next piece that she lived a life of faithfulness to her husband
Yeah.
and to the church,
Mm.
and is known for her good deeds.
Yeah.
And not just known, the text actually says well known.
Yeah.
To your point, there it does matter how we live now,
Yep.
so that when we do get to the end, what that support looks like. Because there is limited availability of a church. Even the church there in Ephesus, it was limited what that care looked like. And so
Mm.
we have that, and it can seem harsh at first read, but it actually provides clarity. Because just us three in the room, we would disagree on who, how, what does it look like to care? Like
Yeah.
it would be hard
Yeah.
because we have different hearts and certain things move us a certain way. and
Absolutely.
so the clarity is super helpful, at least to give us a starting point to go and to go, man, this is why it actually matters to do this right in the
Mhm.
beginning. So so the 60 part plays in because I don't think the church forever is called to carry the burden for 25 years. That would have never been Paul's.
Yeah.
Never been Paul's
Mhm.
thought process.
Well, and again, the reminder in all of this
Yeah.
is that when he says the church, capital C, he's still talking about a bunch of folks. And the
Yes.
assumption is that those individual folks are
Yeah.
taking care of individuals.
Right.
So the church wouldn't have to carry this massive burden if
Right.
the community is already
Yeah.
taking care of their relatives. And you know what I mean?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's why literally, and there's the other reason
Yeah.
I was going to say he tells them to remarry is he said, if you're a childbearing age, well, I mean, if you can have kids, that means you'll have somebody when you get older
Yep.
that could
Mhm.
take, like, just practically is
Yeah.
like, how can we make sure that there isn't all these people who are left alone? Because that's never God's desire and design. But sometimes it happens. And in the cases, to your point, that it does, that there is zero family.
Yeah.
Yeah. The church steps in and cares, right?
Yeah.
And
Or zero family willing to be helpful,
willing.
right? That was Brian's question. right?
willing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think would have happened in Ephesus.
Certainly.
They were first generation Christians.
Yeah.
They would have for sure been like, I ain't helping her. Or a lot of the divorce was around abandonment
Yep.
in the first century.
Mhm.
Like a lot of that was like, you became a Christian. That's why Paul talks in 1 Corinthians, don't leave.
Mhm.
You may win them over.
Yeah.
And so I think that situation would have been prevalent in those days as well. And again, I do appreciate that Paul doesn't get into the uber specifics. Gives us enough that we could be wise, that David
Yeah.
and I could hear a situation and go, okay, what do we think the Spirit of God's telling us to do?
Mm.
And then I remember what James says.
Yeah.
James says, if you're going to err on the
Mhm.
side of mercy, not judgment. So that's kind of our default line too.
Yeah.
We think through of caring for people. I want to get to the end and God go, yeah, Josh was way more, because he says with the level you use, that's how God will use for you kind
Yep.
of deal. I always want to be more merciful in
Mhm.
judgment, but I also, as a leader within the church and been tasked by our elders, we do have to be wise
Certainly.
and good stewards.
Certainly. And I think in leadership, that's really important.
Yep.
I do think quite often I hear from people in the American church an overemphasis on being wise and not being taken advantage of
Right.
versus being sacrificial and being
Right.
willing to help. right? I do think they are both important things, obviously, and
Yeah.
depending on where you are in seats on the bus, more important in one way or the other. But I think you do filtering it through the James passage.
Yeah.
It's like maybe be more merciful.
Absolutely. Again, because at the end of the day, I go, and personally as an individual, I go, yeah, if I have the opportunity, I'm going to do good. That's it.
Josh, but what if they're taking advantage of you?
Yeah, then that's on them and the Lord. That's how
Yeah.
I always kind of if I again when I get to these situations, if the Spirit of God has prompted me to respond to be obedient, I can only listen to what the Spirit's telling me to do.
Yeah.
I cannot listen to what the Spirit is telling other people. And again, we've talked about this when we talked about. So I started carrying food bags in my car to just pass out, right?
Yep.
Because again, if you really are hungry, you'll take my food bag.
Yeah.
And sometimes, again, like I'm obviously a larger man, so I don't mind to give people a ride. But like I'm not telling my wife to do that.
Yeah.
Right. But I'll do that. And I won't do that probably with my kids in the car. I would probably do it now with Judah. But maybe not. I just have to feel it out. But I've pulled over before and go, hey, you want to go to McDonald's, man? Let's run in here real quick.
Yeah.
Let's sit down and have a conversation. Way more than just me throwing money at you. Because actually I feel like you just need to have your humanity restored.
Yeah.
So again, I can only like prepare myself and respond how the Spirit of God tells me to respond to do those things. And even at the end of the day, if I get swindled, I go, all right, man. We've been swindled here in our benevolence for the church. I'm positive. There are a couple stories that I'm like, oh, they took us. And I go, all right, man.
But we're going to lean in and hope that like in light of passages like this, we're doing what God has called us to do to be supportive of those who by all means that we, in our understanding and we've sought wisdom on it and go, well, they can't do this themselves.
Right.
And we have the means. So let's help.
And again, looking through the list is just another filter for us to be wise and to go, okay. So again, just all of this stuff is super helpful and just trust the Spirit. And if you're in this situation asking, what do I do? If it's your family, well, again, God knows.
Yeah.
You have to. Even again, and as I shared, when I sat and did this myself, I'm asking myself my own question because my relationship with my mother is not awesome.
Yeah.
She is not a believer. And in fact, it makes my life very difficult.
Yeah.
And I, though, read a text like this and go, well, no one else in my family is believers. It's on me. And I'm going to be obedient. And I just keep going, put your religion into practice, Josh.
Yeah.
And what if it is the thing that ends up saving her and she falls in love with Jesus? It may not, but it definitely can't hurt.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then I don't even know what it looks like. Is it she moves into my home? I don't know. It feels like a disaster waiting to happen, but I don't know. It may be. Is it I buy her house out and she gets to live in her home and I provide care for her where she lives because moving away from all of her friends. That seems bad. I don't know. That's the hard part of this is the how is really unique to every situation.
Well, that's why none of that's in here.
Why none of that's in
there. Yeah. The how ain't in the book, buddy.
Yeah.
It's the why, right?
So, again, So I don't know what that means. Again, for some of you listening going, okay, I feel the burden now. Is Josh saying I have to move them into make them a casita? I didn't say that.
Yeah. No, but you also said I have to follow what the Spirit of God is prompting me to do.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Which means that you're communing with the Spirit of God, which means you're reading his word and you're praying and you're worshiping.
And asking brothers going, hey man, what do you think about this? I'm going to Nate and David going, all right, man, you all know me. You know my family situation. What do you think about this?
Yep.
This is what we're thinking. Right. Or, hey, would you pray with me?
Yeah.
Over the next several weeks, And so again, that's the piece of this is because you are a family. Sometimes family goes, you thought about all that? What about this? Right? You just get a different perspective.
Or you get the know-it-all uncle who always happens to be right and just tells you, here's what you need to do.
Here's what you need to do.
Well, and you just don't like it and you get mad. And then 3 weeks later you go, yeah, you were right.
You were right. I'm going to do it.
He was right.
So again, the how and I think, so it's hard for us to go. That's why I didn't do it in the sermon. It's super hard for me to go, in every situation, you should do this. I don't know.
No. I mean, if let's just think outside, like corner cases that aren't even really corner cases that are very common. It's like, my dad was abusive growing up. Am I supposed to invite him in with my children?
Right.
You go, probably not.
Probably not.
But does that mean that you have no responsibility
Right.
to him? Also, probably not. Like
Right.
you actually have to figure out what it does mean
Yep.
to follow this passage,
Yep.
but still be wise and protect your
Yeah.
family, right?
Right.
Like
Yep.
we can't answer those questions for you.
No, we can't. We just, again, we, especially as the men of our families, have a big responsibility to carry.
Yeah.
And to do this and to do it well. And to, again, just practically, I go, yeah, they cared for me.
Yep.
All right. Okay. I'm going to do the thing. So again, not an easy passage and not an easy command
No.
of scripture,
Mhm.
but one that will make us look way more like Jesus if we follow it than less like Jesus. And
Yep.
again, I don't think I'm going to get to the end and go, I hated doing that. There's a bunch of people. There's two. What I also thought when I was writing, there's a bunch of people in our church who are currently doing this or have done this.
Yeah.
And man, I tip my hat to you
Yeah.
because you are faithfully living out what God's calling you to do. And so hopefully you two walked away going, man, I feel good about myself.
Yeah.
Not in a prideful way, but just in oh man, I'm being obedient. And it makes the hard worth it.
Yeah.
When you're sacrificing and giving up of your desire, you're going, okay, this is what we are called to do. And hopefully too, you got maybe like a pep talk, like, hey, go get them. Good job kind of deal. So not just the ones of us who are not wanting to do it.
Yeah.
We're reminded that we have to. Hopefully the ones who are doing it currently felt good.
Yeah. And especially, like, I know a couple people who have taken in their mothers or fathers, and
Yeah.
it's gotten to the point where it was like, we can't keep her safe. We can't keep us safe. Like, we need to do something else. And
Right.
making that
You
decision,
just got to
that hard
do your
decision,
best. Yeah.
what is also another like
Mhm.
admirable, like, you gotta
Yeah.
be smart. So, Josh, last question for you is, if someone has a widow or someone knows of a widow,
Right.
how do they get connected to Quad City, and how do they get the help that they
Yeah,
need? Where
absolutely.
do they go?
Yeah, so at the Prescott campus, Brad and Anthony oversee most of the pastoral care and the benevolent side of our ministries. And then at PV, it's Corey, Heward, and then Ken. They
Yeah.
kind of oversee a lot of that. And it really is. It's just making people aware. But I would challenge you, if you're in a life group,
Yeah.
like 12 of you could pull together and go do that thing.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, you don't have to send it to
Yeah.
the church as an organization to
as an
figure that out.
organization. Yeah, but if it is an organizational thing and it
Mhm.
maybe is just an awareness thing, for sure. Absolutely. Hey, let us know for sure. Like that, those would be the four
Yeah.
guys to kind of connect with. But I think our groups should be doing these kinds of things. I think we should be connected. And I think if we opened our eyes, we would see it
Yeah.
on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Way more than most people don't want to sit alone because there are some, but most people, specifically maybe older ladies,
Yeah.
I don't think they want to.
No.
They just do because their husband's not there anymore, or they just don't have anybody. And there's a lot of new people into Prescott. Like David, we were talking about that. Our
Mhm.
population, we have a higher concentration of widows than I've ever experienced in a
Yeah.
church, just because of where we're at
Mhm.
in Prescott, a retirement community. So
Yep.
we actually have more opportunities to live this out, which is a great thing. But I think just opening your eyes, recognizing, and like those ladies did with the lady who came and told me, they just went up to her and said, "Hey, you want to sit with us?
Yeah.
We'd love to sit with you." You know, well, I think we can do that.
Yeah.
Invite them into your family, invite them into your row at church, and go, "Hey, come sit with our family." There's grandpas and grandmas who've, along the way of my church journey, who've just kind of took me in and, made life a little sweeter being away from home.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
I want to do that for others.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
absolutely.
man. It's really easy and really typical for us culturally to just mind your own business, stay in your lane, and just ignore what's going on around you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so easy. It is very difficult to retrain your eyes and your ears to see and hear
Good word.
who might be in need. So man, add that to your prayer life.
Yeah.
God, open my eyes.
That's a good word, brother.
Help me see who's hurting and what I can do to help.
That's a good word, man. That's good.
It's a good place to land. So hope you guys have a good week, and we'll see you guys Sunday.
Yes, sir.